So there's been an awful lot written and said in the last couple of days about Bosasa Mkhwebane, the public protector, and a donation or a payment that was made to Cyril Ramaphosa's election campaign for the 2017 ANC leadership. It's all rather confusing and it may sound quite overwhelming. So we're doing an explainer. Carl Cowan from News 24 Investigations has been looking at the story since the very beginning. So Carl, we're going to try and break this down and make it as simplistic as possible for people to understand.
Sure.
This all starts with a donation, a payment, money that was made to the election campaign. What is the genesis of this? Where did it all start?
So, Mandy, it is quite a complicated thing because there's been a lot of sort of layers in how this has been presented to the public. So if we want to break it down very, very simply, there was a 500,000 Rand donation made from the CEO of a company called Bosasa. His name is Gavin Watson, and he donated this money to the CR17 campaign in around October 2017. Then what happened was, in an affidavit that a Bosasa auditor, a guy called Piet Venter, had made, he said this 500,000 Rand was for President Cyril Ramaphosa's son, Andile, for a foundation linked to Andile. It later transpired this foundation doesn't exist. This payment was actually to Ramaphosa's campaign.
So how did we first hear about this? When did this 500,000 Rand first reach the public domain?
So it spectacularly jumped into the national spotlight in Parliament in November last year, when DA leader Mmusi Maimane had this affidavit by Mr. Venter, and he confronted Cyril Ramaphosa with it, and he said, you know, Mr. President, we can't have family members benefiting. Tell us about what this 500,000 Rand is all about. Now, at that stage, then the president responds and he says, oh no, I've looked at this issue. I'm aware that my son has this contract with Bosasa, and this 500,000 Rand was paid to him during the course of their business together.
But then Ramaphosa changed his explanation to Parliament.
That's right. A couple of days later, he writes to the then Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, and he says, look, I was mistaken. This is actually not a payment that had anything to do with my son. This was a donation to my presidential campaign for the African National Congress in 2017.
Now, how does the public protector, Bosasa Mkhwebane, get involved in this scenario? How does she then wade in?
So DA leader Mr. Mmusi Maimane, he then takes that response, that letter that Mr. Ramaphosa, then President Ramaphosa writes to the Speaker, and he says, oh, hang on, something's not right. So he writes to the public protector, Bosasa Mkhwebane, and he says, please investigate. I believe there's money laundering. I believe there's something dodgy here. Have a look at this. There might be corruption here. And she initiates the investigation towards the end of November last year.
So what's been happening since November last year? Has she been investigating?
She has, very actively, from judging from what we're picking up in reports and those sort of things. You know, these investigations are quite confidential, so we don't really have insight into it. But what we're seeing now is that she's been busy from day one. She's subpoenaed bank statements. She's gone and interviewed everybody, including the president and all his campaign managers. We believe that she's interviewed some of the Bosasa people involved as well. And then she's issued what is known as Section 79 notices. So she's issued a notice to the president to say, I've made a negative finding against you. Please respond to the issues raised in this notice.
Okay, and then last week, we first see a report which seems like a preliminary report being leaked to the media. What does that report say? So
that report is leaked to the Sunday Independent, and they write a story saying that Advocate Mkhwebane has found the president guilty of misleading Parliament. So essentially what that means is that when he responded to Maimane in November last year, he lied. So they are saying that he had willful knowledge, that he knew about the fact that this payment had nothing to do with anything that it was for his campaign, and that he lied to the country, essentially, and to Parliament, which is an offence in terms of the Executive Ethics Act. So he can't really try and sort of put a blanket over this and say, oh, but I didn't say this or I didn't say that. Everything's on record. Everything's recorded. It was broadcast to the entire South Africa. So now the conversation starts to become more about what the president knew when and what he knew when he responded.
And then yesterday the Sunday Times publishes a front page report saying that Mkhwebane is looking at a 400 million Rand money laundering case. Yeah. What's that about?
So in the way that this payment was done, the 500,000 Rand donation to the campaign, it's quite simple. It starts off, the money is in Gavin Watson's personal bank account. The 500,000 is then transferred to a bank account of a company called Mioto Trading and Advisory Services. Now from Mioto Trading and Advisory Services, it's then paid onto the campaign. So the entire transaction, the way that it's constructed, because simplest would have been for Gavin to log on to his banking and pay the money into the bank account and say, there's your donation, Mr. Ramaphosa. But he didn't do that. They tried to hide the payment. They tried to hide the origin. They tried to hide the nature of the payment. So that's where the money laundering conversation starts. Now, the Sunday Times story yesterday is speaking about 400 million rand. They're speaking about totals of money involved in all 3 bank accounts. Now, that's 2 bank accounts linked to the campaign and another bank account linked to the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation. So they are arguing, in the story they are revealing for the first time that the public protector has actually gone and looked at all of the money flows into that campaign donation account and said, well, I believe there's money laundering in the way that these funds were then paid out of that account into the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation account and into another account linked to the campaign.
So who's accused, allegedly, of doing the money laundering? Watson or Ramaphosa?
So if you take the Sunday Times story and the Sunday Independent story, then you will have, you're left with the feeling that the public protector believes the president is guilty of money laundering in some way or the other. But if you look at it forensically from our point of view, obviously bearing in mind that we haven't had access to these bank statements, so we don't really know what's happening there, Watson is guilty of money laundering because this is, money laundering by its very definition is about the proceeds of crime and trying to make illegitimate cash appear legitimate. So where the argument about money laundering comes in with the president and those accounts, it's very difficult to tell. But you can actually pinpoint it very, very forensically and say, Gavin Watson tried to hide this money in the way that he conducted that transaction. And that's where I believe the money laundering probe should focus.
Late last night, the Cyril Ramaphosa CR17 campaign issued a statement. Yeah. What did they say?
They basically dismissed all claims of money laundering. They said, look, we've been working with the public protector since day one. We've accounted for every cent. We've gone through this process with her. We don't believe that there's any basis for money laundering in the way that we conducted this campaign. In fact, they dismiss it as bizarre and baseless. And then they also say that, you know what, we followed every regulation, every law. We were there and we've cooperated with everybody. We haven't hidden anything. Now, there are also reports that in the beginning, the public protector requested these campaign managers and said to them, listen, tell us who donated the money. Give us a breakdown of all the donations made into that bank account. And rightfully, I think they refused because this is not an investigation about who donated to Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign. It's an investigation into one 500,000 rand payment, and that's where it should end.
Now, this morning we've had 2 statements. One from Bosasa about what exactly the request was from Mmusi Maimane, and then one from Mmusi Maimane. What is the confusion around what the DA actually asked for and the public protector's mandate? Can you unpack all of that for us?
Sure. So this morning there was a story in the Business Day, and it said that the DA was distancing itself from the claims in the Sunday Times story that they had not requested an investigation into money laundering, had or had not requested. So if you look at the original complaint letter, the DA does say, look, there's concerns of money laundering here, please can you investigate? So there's a statement from the DA that comes through this morning clarifying that position, saying, no, we've been unequivocal about this, we've always asked about that the money laundering issue be investigated. The public protector also issued a statement this morning saying she was surprised at the stance now taken by the DA and the campaign managers, considering that everyone had been aware that the money laundering was part of the scope of the investigation from the beginning. And these are questions that she had asked and these are answers that she had received. But then she also raises a concern about the conduct of certain journalists, in which she says, I believe that this conduct amounts to interfering in the investigation. But she doesn't say who, she doesn't mention any names. But if you take into account a preliminary investigation report is leaked, then the Sunday Times has this big leak about these 3 accounts and they write this fantastic front page story. And then you sort of start to realize why the campaign managers are claiming in that same statement that information is being drip fed into the public domain to sort of make the president look bad.
So is this all a proxy war for what's actually going on in the ANC? There have been some suggestions that the public protector is acting as a proxy for Ace Magashule and the 2 different factions in the ANC. Is that really what's going on here?
Well, we can speculate. We don't have any solid evidence to say yes, definitely, or no, for sure not. But if you look at what the public protector has decided to keep herself busy with in the last couple of months, the investigation into the Rogue Unit, the investigation into the former SARS official's early retirement, Mr. Ivan Pillay, those sort of things, and also the findings against Pravin Gordhan, who is seen as aligned to Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, the public protector obviously maintains that she is independent and she is doing her work without fear or favour. But you do have to ask yourself, if you look at the Estina Dairy matter, where Ace Magashule and Mr. Mosebenzi Zwane were heavily implicated, from media investigations of that issue, why did she ignore their involvement completely? I remember at the time looking at the Estina Dairy Farm report, and I don't think Ace Magashule was mentioned once in the report.
And of course the High Court overturned that issue.
Correct.
So what does all of this mean? What are the implications of the Public Protector's finding? Will this final report then go to Parliament? What does it mean for the President?
So for the President, he's in a very sticky situation because this is part of he's part of a political party that very much has turned around and sort of lauded the previous Public Protector's sort of position in her State of Capture report to say, no, she did a great job and she did a very necessary thing. We know that she was heavily under attack from the same party at the time. But now the President is in a situation where he's going to have an adverse finding, and by all accounts, the findings have been made already, of impropriety against him, that he misled Parliament, that he's possibly guilty of money laundering, and he's going to be under investigation by law enforcement.
Could this be used as grounds for impeachment against him?
I believe so. But at the same time, there's a different element to this. As you mentioned, the Estina Dairy Farm matter has been overturned in court. There's another, the ABSA Bank Corp bailout report that the Public Protector did has also been overturned in court, and we're waiting for a Constitutional Court judgment on her. There's a declarator in that judgment that seeks to speak directly to her fitness to hold office. There's a complaint by the DA. The same party that laid the complaint against Ramaphosa is also asking the Parliamentary Committee on Justice to look into her fitness to hold office as a result of these things. So there is a question about whether or not, who's going to blink first. Will the Parliamentary Committee remove Mkhwebane before this finding is made? Because it's inevitable as well that the President will take the report on review if he doesn't agree with the findings. So he believes he's innocent and he made a mistake in responding in Parliament. He didn't willfully lie to anybody. But if the Public Protector finds that he lied to Parliament and that he's guilty of money laundering, we are going to have a situation where his political enemies are going to try and push for his removal.
So I think I have a much better understanding now of what exactly is going on between the Public Protector and the President and the DA. But thank you, Carl, for explaining all of that. And we'll be watching closely to see who does blink first.
Indeed.